Good evening, everybody. My name is Aharon. I'm from the Freedivers. You can find us at www.freedivers.net. I'm an AIDA instructor trainer, at least for the moment, and we also deal in training. We deal with all the AIDA courses, including instructor courses, and we also deal with the training of elite athletes who want to improve their results in competition or even go for records. We also have a program for remote coaching, which you can find on our website, and that deals with either specific questions that you might have or alternatively for training programs, and we actually guide you through training programs for a season. Now, we have a lot of questions tonight. I had planned to deal with mental training. I'm going to have to postpone that till the next one and answer these questions. And please postpone any other further questions that you may have till after our next session, because there's a lot of requests for mental training, visualization, and some really hot topics. So the first question tonight comes from a gentleman by the name of Stephen Jones. He wants to know about the noseclip. He would like to know what are the advantages of the noseclip, what are the disadvantages of the noseclip, and another little wangle in there, which I'll deal with in a second. The first thing is that the noseclip is a tool only for the competitive diver or a diver who is diving deep. Here is the thing. It is not suitable for spear fishermen. The first part of the question, or a middle part of the question that he asked, that I've had asked by spear fishermen in the past, is what happens if I put a nose clip over the top of my mask? Well, first of all, that doesn't work. And if it did, you would no longer have a mask, you'd have goggles. And if you want to find out what happens to your eyes and what happens to your face, if you wear a pair of squim goggles and go down deep, be my guest. But please don't do it, because you're probably going to damage your eyes. The next thing is, what happens if I put one of those tiny little spring nose clips on that synchronized swimmers use, and I put that underneath my mask? Well, very simply, this more or less the same story. Either the thing is not tight enough so that you can equalize with it, so it's no advantage to you whatsoever, or alternatively, it is so tight that you have tremendous resistance against equalizing any air into the mask. So that's a lose-lose situation. Let me deal with the saner part of this. By the way, before I finish there, if a spear fisherman really wants to improve his equalization, then I very much and very earnestly suggest that he learn BTV, Béance tubulaire volontaire, the art of equalizing your ears without using your hands and without cinching up your mask strap until you look like Kim Jong, what's it from North Korea. So let's get on to the second part. What are the advantages of the nose clip? And what are the disadvantages of it? The advantages of the nose clip for the competitive diver are simply huge. First of all, you don't need to equalize the mask at depth. So you're saving a tremendous amount of your cheek fill that might go into your mouth fill, that might go into equalizing your mask, for actually equalizing your airspaces. The next thing is that it's a question of rhythm here and everything else. First of all, very few people can really use a mask efficiently at depth. At the moment I count two. Martin Stepanek, definitely, and Natalia Molchanova. However, for the rest of us humans, I don't really count those as humans. I would recommend the noseclip for deep diving. Here's the thing. If you're in the no fins discipline or free immersion, it's nearly a must, because to interrupt your pulls or interrupt your movements with the breaststroke in order to equalize your ears, you're nearly inevitably going to be at some stage late with an equalization. And with a nose clip on, it is absolutely instantaneous. So this is not a small saving, it's a huge advantage. Disadvantages, you don't have that much visibility. But really, are you going to read a newspaper down there? For those people who are going deep, it's going to be dark anyway. Now, the question of goggles, yeah, and I'm talking about liquid goggles here, that you let water into on purpose with lenses in them that correct your vision so that you can see underwater. There is inevitable distortion. This is the disadvantages of them. There's inevitable distortion. This can cause a problem with grabbing for the tag at the bottom. It certainly can cause a problem when you return to the surface. Actually, two problems. One, an awful lot of people forget that they have these things on and forget to raise them. Remember what the surface protocol is. First, yeah, I remove any facial gear that I've got on my face. Nose clip, mask, or goggles. The next thing is I give the sign and I say I'm okay. What you say after that's up to you. However, the goggles, yeah, tend not to work that well on the surface because they've probably got holes in them so that they flood correctly.
You can't see.
Yeah, and they once they have only air in them, you won't be able to see a thing. Also, grabbing for a float or a line, once your head has broken the water, may be a very tough proposition. And if you miss it and your mouth and nose duck under the water, you're going to get red carded. So they do have, they certainly have disadvantages. I've got a very cheap pair here, which is actually very serviceable.
Maybe that's what I was saying.
I made it myself in the sense that I bought the lenses. Martin Stepanek sells the lenses for a cheap price. The goggles are very easy to construct. I bought myself a very cheap pair of swim goggles. Remember, they don't have to fit hermetically, because what I did was I put here deliberately in the goggles holes so that the water could get in. Okay? So that they would flood. The next thing with this thing is the installation of the lenses. Terribly simple. You put a tape measure above your head and you look in the mirror or get somebody to photograph you, even better, and you can measure the distance between the pupils of your eyes. This is critical because these things are very much more individual than a mask is. And then, yeah, you can stick the lenses either on the inside or the outside of this, providing it's close enough to the face. If you choose to stick them to the inside, as I've done, I've taken I don't know whether you can see this here, the pink part surrounding the lens, the orange part there, is actually a bit of corrugated plastic electrical conduit. It is exactly the right size to hold the concave lens in place, and it's fixed with a rubber band inside the little bit of electrical conduit, and the whole thing is secured to the mask with hot glue, a hot glue gun. And when I was doing that, I of course put marks on the outside of the lens for centering the lens. That's how to make a very cheap pair of very serviceable goggles that will be for you. Don't try to pass them to your neighbor, because unless he has the pupils exactly the same distance apart that you do, it won't work. So let me just summarize. The idea of a nose clip and a mask together doesn't work in any way, and is even a dangerous and not recommendable hobby. The advantages of a nose clip for the competitive diver are simply huge. You don't need your hands to equalize, even for the constant weight diver, where you're in classic monofin position going down. You don't want to have to move your hand down in front of your face to equalize all the time. So unless you're a person who is doing BTV, I strongly recommend to you practicing at the earliest possible opportunity with the nose clip. This takes a little bit of getting used to, friends. At first, when you come up, don't be surprised if you burp air. This is absolutely normal. If you have 2 or 3 people who are practicing with a nose clip for the first time on a course, it sounds like the frog's chorus from Aristophanes. They're going blurp, 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 blurp the moment they come up. This is absolutely natural. What happens is this. When you're equalizing your ears, as they've been used to with a mask, when you take your hand away, there's a slight spillage of air from the nose into the mask. That's good, because it helps equalize your mask. Now the trouble is, when you've got a nose clip on, that doesn't happen. So what happens to that air? The thing is that at first you tend to swallow that air into your stomach. Now, here's the thing with that. Don't worry about that, about the burping thing. It will go away of its own. Another little tip. If you want to avoid discomfort on the way up, when you start feeling pressure building back up of the air expanding in the sinuses, I remove my nose clip. There is no great advantage of arriving at the surface with a nose clip on. It's another thing to remember to take off during your surface protocol. You will not get an entry of water in your nose or sinuses if you're doing this when you actually feel discomfort. Don't do it like a robot. I'm going to do it the moment I leave the bottom, because if you're leaving the bottom very deep, you may well flood your sinuses. But the discomfort is telling you that there is pressure building up. I hope I've got this in the right hole. You have pressure building up behind the nose clip, and that means to say that you will not get an entry of water into the nose, if you take your nose clip off. So I think we've covered that question. I'd like to go on to the next question. The next question was one that actually by a gent who I answered in a private conversation with.
Cars.
Cars. It was concerning, he'd been doing a lot of aerobic exercise at the aerobic threshold. That's to say, at the threshold between aerobic and anaerobic, and he'd been pushing the threshold out further and further away, so that he had superb aerobic conditioning, and he found that he was not getting any drop of heartbeat towards the end of extended dynamics. Surprise, surprise. A very easy way to prove to yourself what I'm going to tell you now, that if you're doing a lot of aerobic exercise, and you may be doing it for something else, don't expect that this is benefiting your freediving. It is actually sabotaging it. And I'll tell you the reason for this. Very simple. You can check this out for yourself. Remember that I talked about the breath walk in one of my former webinars, and I said that there were 4 times that you checked your pulse. The 3rd time that you check your pulse is at the end of the walk, before you take the first breath. And you'll be surprised that a person with a good breath hold reflex, a good dive reflex, a person with a good dive reflex, you'll find that their heartbeat drops during the walk. This is extraordinary, but it happens. Now, it doesn't happen if you've been doing a lot of aerobic exercise, particularly pushing the aerobic threshold. This is a reflex of the heart when the brain says, hey, there's an emergency, I'm not getting enough oxygen. So what happens is that the brain gives a message to the heart, hey, we have to slow the heartbeat. And this will not happen. This is very beneficial for the freediver. This will not happen if you've been pushing the aerobic threshold. So if you're not pushing the aerobic threshold, how do you get fit? I've already mentioned hill repeats. There are many different exercises. They're all anaerobic or lactic exercises. If you begin the season with a reasonable aerobic base, these should not be a challenge to go into, and they will put up your fitness for freediving hugely. Forget all the measurements about VO2 max and everything else. Let's not get too scientific on this thing. You really need lactic acid, yeah, and anaerobic training, yeah, which is basically dealing with CO2. CO2 and lactic acid. CO2, carbonic acid, lactic acid, the whole chain. And that's the training we need as freedivers. It's not reasonable to do 20 kilometers, yeah, 10 times a week at flat out as close to the aerobic threshold as one can and expect good results in freediving. Hey, you're breathing, aren't you? Are you going to be breathing in freediving? Forget it. So my answer to you, Kaz, is simply this. Forget the anaerobic training. You've got a good base. That's all you need is a base. You've got more than a good base. Your full concentration now is going to have to go on really quite extreme CO2 training and lactic acid training if you want to correct this thing. Your suggestion of reducing the blood flow actually doesn't work. So there's only one way of reducing the blood flow. You can't do this mentally. Forget it. Yeah? The only way you can do that is by moving slower. Not the best idea in the world, and it still will not give you the same reflex. So no, that doesn't work, sorry. I mean, you can play around with it as much as you like, but I certainly don't recommend that one. You seem to be a giant of aerobic fitness. Now I would convert that into the anaerobic phase. Heel repeats, a lot of sprints underwater in dynamic. You can even do, and I will go on, there's a sort of continuation into the next question. So I'll deal with that in the next question of what you can actually do. We did address some of these problems in a private conversation. You produced some very interesting ideas for experimentation. I'm not in favor of all of us becoming little physiologists with all kinds of physiological theories. Basically, what works is what works. Years and years ago, there was a wise old head sage sitting on a mountaintop in the Himalayas. His name was Claude Chapuis. He wrote in a French magazine called L'Apnée, and at a certain stage I devoured all his articles. The only thing that's actually retained, that stayed in my mind about what he wrote, is he had a brilliant expression saying, "L'apnée s'entraîne l'apnée." And I applaud it very much. You couldn't be more right, Claude. The best training for freediving is freediving. It gets proved over and over and over and over again. We've touched on this because it comes into an awful lot of subjects. An awful lot of European divers who have a very high standard in the pool think that in a very short period of exposure they can convert that into depth. Sorry guys, no, it doesn't work that way. Yeah, you need inurement to depth, and that takes time. You need tremendous flexibility for depth, and even if you've done a lot of flexibility outside the water, it ain't going to work until you start really doing depth training. So, sorry, you have to allow the time for depth training if you're going to be a seriously deep diver. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, which is a very intelligent question, and one I like a lot. It allows me to waffle some more. A second, I'm going to try and find it here.
One of those?
Yeah.
Here.
Okay. This is concerning lactic acid in dynamic apnea, in no fins, dynamic apnea. He starts off by saying that he has trained himself to have a correct, by today's standards, breathe up. That's to say, presumably not more than tidal volume until the last breath or two breaths. And then also not over breathing in that, and also to he's got a dive response that comes in immediately and doesn't need warm up. He's struggling with lactic acid, particularly in the arms. Okay, and he is saying that at the moment it's causing him all kinds of grief, because it's so severe that in order to do the same distance as somebody else, he's having to do an extra 30 seconds or even a minute of dive time. Because if he speeds up, the lactic acid gets more severe. Well, here's the ticket. Back to what I just said, and very, very, very essential part of your training has to be lactic acid training. And here's something where you really, really have to push the box. Now, anything that I'm recommending, please take into account, and I hope that I don't have to mention this, that you must have a dedicated partner to you. It is not good enough to say to the lifeguard, here, Hey Joe, can you keep an eye on me? I'm doing such and such down there. I mean, truly a dedicated partner who's going to be right by you, whether you're doing static or whether you're doing dynamic, and ready to respond within seconds. A lifeguard, the first time, he's going to get used to, and the first time a lady walks by in a nice bikini, yeah, his attention is going to turn. Then when his attention has come back to you, he sees that you're already underwater. He hasn't got a clue when you went down, but he knows that Joe Soak, you, hold your breath for an awfully long time. He doesn't want to interrupt you. Probably when he does think maybe that's a bit too much, it might be time to actually inform your wife, girlfriend, or parents that, whoops, it was a bit too late. So please, dedicated partner for everything on safety. Safety beyond everything, particularly in the more critical exercises that we're going to be talking about. We're talking about more advanced stuff here. In reply, this is Matt's question. In reply to you, Matt, I would say the first thing is I'm going to deal with the pool first. A lot, yeah, of work, dynamic, empty lungs. You can do it, if you want to make it even more severe, with a static phase first. But let's just say that you do it without the static phase. You're just doing dynamic, empty lungs. If you want to particularly specify your arms, though it's not strictly necessary in order to get the full advantage of this, but you can do it arms only. And it depends on what length of pool that you're doing this in. Arms only, 50 meters, totally empty, might be a challenge. I'm not sure of your level here. You haven't given me any numbers. I know that you're an elite diver. I'm sorry, but I don't think it probably would be. But then you can start reducing interval between recovery period between let's say 50 meter dynamic arms only stuff. Then you can start doing 3, yeah, which can be arms only or full body, flat out empty lung sprints underwater. And again, start with a sane interval and then reduce the interval. And by the third one, you should have difficulty completing it. If you do not have difficulty completing that one, then your interval between the dives is too long. Now, for the times when you can't get to the pool, there's a very good exercise for the arms. If you're very rich and have a private income and are a banker, you can probably afford to buy a piece of machinery that is recommended on television by Chuck Norris. It's called the Total Gym, well, probably the Total Gym 1000 it used to be called, but today it's probably the 5000 for all I know, the more modern version of it. Virtually what it is a sliding bench on rails with cables, and you pull yourself up the slope and down the slope, so you're working against body resistance. Pippin and Audrey used to use this as their nearly only exercise, and it works like this. They used to do it on full lungs. I won't go into their training program on that. It doesn't particularly concern us here. But again, I would recommend empty lung training, like do a static empty lung before it, yeah? Then after, let's say, a minute static on empty lungs, start pulling, but start doing it in the same movement that you would use for breaststroke, that you're using the same muscles. Now, when you cannot hold your breath anymore, keep on doing the exercise. And this should give you a good lactic acid hit. Now, obviously in this particular machine, the steeper the angle is, the higher the percentage of body weight you're pulling. Now, I did recommend this for bankers, politicians, and all those people who are unlikely to do free diving, because the rest of us may not be able to afford this. And even if it folds nicely under your bed, this really upsets the cat. So I've got a better solution for you guys. Yeah, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. It's right here. I have here something called a TerraBand. It's an elastic band about...
You can buy them in rolls or in ready cuts. That's how they look.
4 to 6 inches wide. It is cheap, very affordable. They come in different colors which denote different strengths. Now, Matt, here's the answer to your question. I recommend that you put a roll of toilet paper in the middle of this thing. Now, what you do is this. You put the toilet paper on the other side of a door, poke the two ends through the bottom of the door, so that now when you pull, yeah, the toilet paper is stopping the thing pulling through the bottom of the door. Do you follow what I mean? And you lie 1.5 meters, 2 meters away from the door, depending on your height, arm reach and everything else, and the amount that you want to pull. And you lie on your back, on the floor, and you can do your exercise absolutely perfectly. Yeah, you can do your exercise the same thing. Again, empty lung training with that, and exactly the same thing that I recommended for the total gym.
I will just pause you to update you that I went to Apnea CZ. Apparently, Matt did 180 dynamic no fins on the 9th of March.
Thank you, Matt. That's huge. You may well need even the strongest band, and even quite a distance from the door might be too weak for you. So use 2 bands, use 3 bands, tune it for your particular thing. If you find that you've got to do 300 pulls or something in order to get a lactic acid burn after you've let go of your breath, obviously you're going to have to up the resistance of the bands. I can't fine tune that for you unless I was with you personally. But I'm absolutely sure that you know as well as I do how to do that very, very well yourself. You will find that if you do a lot of lactic acid training, and particularly on empty lungs, you'll, by the way, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, remove all weights before you do it. That you will gain extra meters on this thing. And you will be able to up your speed considerably. You obviously have a very good dive response. So this allows you, if you can overcome the lactic acid problem, it allows you to do more intense work without getting into a severe oxygen debt. And that will be dependent on your dive response. Now, another tip. The question is, do we begin with residual lactic acid in the muscles? Something that worked for me extremely well was, I don't know whether you want to do this before every training session, but certainly you can do it on days when you're doing a max or when competition. Lie down on your back on a yoga mat in a warm place and do at least 30, recommend 60 of the slowest breaths that you can do through your nose. Yeah, we want to build up nitric oxide. We want to get rid of residual CO2 in the muscles, and this is quite a way to do both things. Now here's the ticket. How slow? Well, if you breathe out, let's say for 30 seconds, if the breath, the next inhalation is jerky, you've tried to do it too slowly. So, in other words, as slowly as you can do it, but not at the expense of the quality of your breathing. You will find also, if you do it quite soon before your warm-up period, or what should stand for your warm-up period, you will find that what happens is that this puts you exactly into the right brainwave pattern that you want to be, which is associated, of course, with breathing. All this comes from sleep research. I did talk about sleep research before, the 3 stages of sleep. Alpha wave predominant from 14 hertz down to about 11, theta wave from 11 down to about 4, and delta wave from 4 down to about 2. We did talk about REM sleep being on somewhere between the border between alpha and theta wave. And we did talk that in each cycle is about 90 minutes, which actually corresponds to dominant nostril changes. We talked about all this stuff before. This recommendation of the very slow breaths actually comes out of that particular draw. Experiment with it and see if it works for you. For me, it worked very well indeed. And that can also be a help. I do not recommend chemical solutions to this. People were using bicarbonate of soda. Good luck. This causes an awful lot of upset in the stomach. Can cause diarrhea, which is embarrassing in most pools. I don't recommend it, and also I don't like chemical solutions. One thing that is a tremendous help, this is recommended by Erika Shagatai, and she drew my attention to it, because one of the critical issues in breath hold is, of course, the business of nitric oxide, NO. Not nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, produced in the paranasal sinuses. We were discussing ways of upping nitric oxide in the body. Now, how much it can be actually upped, or let's put it another way, that if you've been exercising, it takes some time to rebuild. So this can cause you quite a lot of grief. I mean, for high-level freedivers, the third-day exhaustion factor can well be attributed to nitric oxide depletion. Erika's been doing some experiments with a very unusual drug called beetroots. And I don't mean borscht here. Yeah, so the Russians, I'm sorry guys, this is a disappointment. She's talking about really putting the things raw into a juicer, extracting the juice and drinking it.
Don't deal with the Russians, and the borscht is
Please.
Ukrainian. Matt is actually Polish.
Okay. Sorry, Matt. No national issues here on the borscht. However, that doesn't work. The plain juice does work. Taken at least half an hour beforehand. She was talking about 70 milligrams, small glass of this stuff. Some people find the earthy taste not to their liking. Well, my recommendations vary from put on a noseclip and drink it to maybe put in a little bit of apple juice or something to sweeten it, or disguise the taste. The Mexicans have a lovely juice drink which is based on this, basically, with celery and nopal, and it's called a vampiro, probably because it converts you into Dracula immediately. It's very red in color. It works exceptionally well and has been proved by Erica to up breath-hold performance for more than 10%. So hear that one. Right. Now we've got to have a look at what else we're doing. You have to excuse me for 1 second. I've got a mess in my notes. Right. Now, that about covers these things. Unfortunately, I haven't got time to open another major topic. So we're going to go to a few perennial things. And this is something that instructors ask an awful lot. People come to me, and this is basically aimed at instructors and also beginners. How do I learn? How do I teach myself? How do I teach other people Frenzel? First of all, don't expect 100% success instantaneously. Some people have more difficulty with this particular question than others. We will be making very shortly a video which will be open to all for the exercises that we recommend for converting somebody from Valsalva to Frenzel. Unfortunately, if you've been doing Valsalva for a very long time, and this I know spear fishermen who have been, they may have even reached 12 to 15 meters on Valsalva, which is really stretching it a bit. But they probably stretch their eardrums enough that they've got a lot of elasticity in the eardrum by doing this. The difficulty with this one is that there are certain habits within the Valsalva that are hard to break. So there is an unlearning process that goes with this. Let me go back over a few general principles here. Your diaphragm is here. Your ears are here. When you're upside down in the water, with Valsalva, where you're using the diaphragm to bring air to your ears, you're pushing against water pressure. This only works for a certain depth. Now, there is something that advanced divers actually confuse with Valsalva. The classic Valsalva usually gives out in less than 8 meters. In very exceptional cases, it goes 8 to 10 meters. I've known advanced divers who say, well, I can do a Valsalva to 20 meters, 25 meters more. Actually, you're probably not doing a Valsalva. You think you are. You're doing air recovery and using that for equalization. That combined with good flexibility is a different story. I don't want to get into that, but you're wrong, guys. Classic Valsalva means that you're pushing air to your ears with the diaphragm, upside down. Sorry, doesn't work. So here's the ticket. We can learn all the correct movements, dry, And actually, it doesn't take very long to learn them. We have tricks that we use lights in front of a mirror, and we do all kinds of things with it. I think I've shown you this before. And we do other exercises that are specifically for training the epiglottis or for training the soft palate. They're very simple exercises and can make you masters of them in a very short time. And you don't need to read 300 reams of gibberish in order to get to that. However, what happens if this still doesn't work? Basically, you have to work out why it isn't working. In a lot of cases, it's because, as I said, there are certain ingrained habits. An instructor can tell somebody who's doing Valsalva very easily. What they're doing is that they're dwelling on the equalization for a long time, and they're definitely forcing the equalization, particularly as they go deeper. These habits, even when they've managed to get an idea of what should be going on in their mouths, can remain. And what happens is that somebody can demonstrate on dry land in front of the mirror, excellent tongue motion. He equalizes, apparently in the Frenzel maneuver. The moment he goes head down, whoops, everything goes to pieces. Look, one of the best ways to deal with this is, I'm sorry, but you may need help from your partner, but I can educate you on how to do this. It's not, I mean, even at 74 I managed to do this quite easily, is stand on your head, yeah, headstand, not handstand, not the three-point headstand, the headstand that works like this, with the elbows that distance apart. And you can be helped by a partner or do it up against a door. You get into the headstand position and practice with a nose clip on, equalizing your ears. If you can do it in an upside down position, you definitely will be able to do it underwater. The enemy of success in this is, of course, scuba. Most scuba instructors tell you, close your nose and blow your nose and your ears will pop. That's almost a certain way of teaching somebody how to do a Valsalva. And yes, it does work on scuba. Yes, it does work head up on freediving to a much deeper depth than it does head down. But no, it doesn't work head down. Why? Because you're pushing against the pressure. When you're head up, you're working with the pressure. But if you want to go on diving head down, better learn it. We will be producing a video on that very shortly and putting it out on YouTube. And it'll teach you how to analyze, how to train people to convert from Valsalva to Frenzel. And we really hope that it'll be a lot of help for you. I would like to reiterate that we may not be able to answer all your questions in a given session. Some I can postpone till another week. The next session that we have is on 24th. And this time, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be dealing with any questions because I have a big issue to address, and that's going to be the whole issue of visualizations, mental training, and the psychological in freediving. And that's a very big subject, so that's going to take up the whole of the next one. I had planned it for this one, but more questions came in and I had promised to answer them, so I'm afraid I've had to give those priority. So next webinar will be devoted to that. Thereafter, there will be the following webinar after that one will be open to questions, which can be questions on the subject of mental training or any other questions that you can come up with, ruling out sex, politics, or religion. So anyway, please understand one thing, that you can find us on www.freediving.com freedivers.net. There are all our contact information there on the website. There's a lot of other information there. We are at the moment also improving our website. So slowly over the next couple of weeks there will be changes to it, and there will be updates. One thing I'll draw your attention to is remote coaching. It's one of our specialities. A lot of athletes have got very far ahead with our program. Notably one from England this winter who has upped his static from 5 minutes to a steady bong, 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 7 minutes, and has a very, very good stress breath hold. He has tremendous flexibility in the thoracic area, and is well prepared for depth training, which he's going to start doing in 6 days from now with us. So here's wishing you all, first of all, thanking you for joining us. I hope it's been of some interest to you or some benefit for you. There are things that I have repeated. I wish you all safe diving and a lot of fun with the diving. And don't forget to smile during your training. It should be fun. Yeah? So good night to you all, and thank you very much from Freedivers.